Hello everyone, and welcome to another wire wrap project tutorial. My name is Jim McIntosh, and today I've got a really interesting project for you. Now, on my channel, you've noticed that I have made traditional wire wrap jewelry. I've shown you how to do that, and I've been making that for years. But you've also seen me make a different type of wire wrap, and it's something I came up with a few years ago. I call it wire smithing. Today, the project we're going to do is going to combine those two projects into one. We're going to make a wire-wrapped pendant, and we're going to hold it in place with a prong setting using wire smithing techniques. And it's great. And after the project's over with, I'm going to explain to you a few different ways that you can use this in your work. There's some really interesting ways that we can use these two techniques combined together. So stick around for that. So if you're ready, let's head over to the bench and we'll get started. So let me show you what we're making. I'll show you a couple of examples here of what we're going to be doing. These are both apatite stones. I've got a bunch of these now. I really like them. But what we're making is we're going to make a prong setting. So we're using two different techniques. For this outside portion, we're using a border wrapping technique, or just traditional wire wrapping, to make this bezel on the outside and also a back support for the piece. We're then adding this centerpiece, this prong setting, which uses wire smithing techniques. And we're going to be joining the two of them together by adding these wraps here from the prong setting to the these back supports for the in the traditional wire wrapping, this border wrapping that we've done. So that's what we're going to be doing. So let's jump right into it. So here's the stone we're going to be using. It's a pretty good sized stone. It has a nice shape to it. I really like this. It's a piece of apatite that I'm using here. I really have come to really love this stone. Beautiful stuff. So what we need to do first is we need to measure the stone, because we're going to do the border wrap first, then we'll build the prongs to set in it second. So we'll start by pulling off a couple inches, about 3 inches of tape. This is painter's tape, and what I'm going to do to measure my stone and to set everything up is I'm going to just cut about a 1/4 or 1/8 of an inch sliver down the length of this and hold on to that tape. We're going to use some more tape later on, and I want you to determine where the top and the bottom of your stone is. Now I'm going to be doing it in this direction with the point at the bottom. So I'm going to start by putting the tape at approximately the top of the stone. Oops. And I'm going to bring it all the way around the outer edge of the stone. This is going to give me the circumference of the stone. And when you get back to the top where the two ends meet, you just need to trim that off. Trim off that excess. We don't need it. And if it overlaps a little bit, this one happens to just be just a hair short, but not a worry at all. Now the next thing we do is we're going to use a fine tip permanent marker, and we're going to put some places on here where we're going to be making some wraps. So I always like to start here at the bottom, and I make a line across the tape where the bottom of it is, the bottom of the stone is. The reason why I do that is that helps me understand where the middle is, and I can build everything from that. So from this center mark, we're going to go to the right a little bit. I'm going to go maybe 10 millimeters, and then we'll do the same thing over here, approximately 10 millimeters. This is going to be the bottom wrap of my stone. Now we'll go to the top. Now, this is the top of the stone where the ends meet. So from the left of that gap there, I'm going to go over about 8 to 10 millimeters, and I'll do the same thing over here. And this is really just to tell me where these wraps approximately should go. We're not going to be doing this exactly like that because we're going to be adding a gap at the bottom and the top of the stone. but this helps us to set these wraps up. So you can now remove the tape from your stone, and I want you to just stick it to your work surface in front of you like this. So here's the center of this, and here's the top wraps that we just did. So it's laid out pretty simply. The next thing we need to do is we need to measure the stone, or measure the tape rather, excuse me. Because we're going to do just some basic math here to get an approximation of how much wire we're going to need for this. So I'm going to measure the length of this, and it is about, it's just over 3.5 inches. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to, for the sake of simplicity, I'm just going to say 3.5 inches. So the math is very simple. We're going to double this length. That should give us enough wire to get around the stone carefully and be able to make some bends and things. So 3.5 and 3.5 is 7 inches. And since we're adding a gap to the bottom and the top of this stone, just about I'd say about a 1/2 inch, maybe a little bit less than a 1/2 inch of a gap above and below, we're going to add a couple of extra inches. So we've got doubled this, so that's 3.5. Now we're going to add 2 inches for the bail, and then an additional 1 inch for that gap at the top and the bottom. So that should give us 9 inches of wire that we need. So we're going to cut 4 strands of wire, 9 inches each. So did you see what I just did there? I had to stop this for a second because apparently I don't know how to do math. I took 7 and I added 3 and came up with 9. I fixed this. I actually do cut 9 inches and it all works out, but my math is really supposed to be 10 inches. Okay, sorry about that. Let's keep watching. Side, we'll pull out this is my trusty old measuring tape here. You can tell this thing has been well used. So we're cutting 4 wires. That should be wide enough for us to be able to hold the stone in place really well. So there's 1, okay, so here's number 4. Now, once I cut the wire off of my spool, I'm going to straighten it very simply by running my fingers, giving a little back pressure to get the bends out. And we're not looking for perfection. We aren't trying to get these perfectly straight. We want them relatively straight. Okay, so here we are on the 4th one. This is the last wire. Just give it a nice straighten out. Now that we have all 4 wires relatively straight, we're going to line them up squarely next to one another. So we want them to be square. You don't want any of them on edge. And we're going to line up one end evenly. And once you get them squared up with one another and even on one end, I want you to take a piece of that painter's tape and I want you to stick it across the wires and then bring it around and make a little flag. We're going to do the same thing on the other end, but I like to start from the flag and I like to run my fingers up this. I'm kind of pinching as I go. And the reason for this is you'll notice, maybe you can't see, but some of these wires kind of want to cross over one another. So as I'm running my fingers up, I'm keeping them all straight and where I want them. And I'm going to put another piece of tape, make a flag over here. Now, we're using a lot of wire here. This is an awful lot of wire. So what I'm going to do first is I am going to find the center and move all of these measurements and things that I put from the tape to the wire, and then I'm going to add a couple more pieces of tape just to hold everything together. So the first thing is we need to find the center of this, and that was 9 inches. So we're going to make the center at 8.5. So I've got this zeroed out, and 8.5, or excuse me, 4.5, 8.5. Math is not my thing today, is it? All right, so that's the center. We mark the center, and we're going to line this center mark with the center mark on our tape, and then just transfer all of these marks that you made from the tape to your wire. And I'm also going to add the end of the tape in there as one of the marks. So there's my end, and then there's the mark. So I should have 3 spots on here where I'm going to wrap. And now, because you'll notice the wire has a tendency to have a mind of its own. It's kind of twisting a little bit and making some funny turns and everything. But now that I know where I'm going to lay my wire out, or lay my wraps out at, I can take another piece of tape and I can put this on here so that it stays in place. This is going to make life so much easier for me as I am wrapping this. So I've got 4 pieces of tape on here, but now notice how the wire is now all together with one another, and that's why I do this, so that it keeps it simple to hold everything together. The next thing we need to do is we need to wrap each of these sections. I always start with the center, so I'm going to pull off a piece of half-round wire. I'm going to pull off about a 6-inch piece, 6 or 8-inch piece of half-round, and this is 22 gauge half-round wire because I'm using 22 gauge square wire. And I'm going to use my wire wrap pliers. I'm going to line them up just outside of one of these. Now, I am right-handed, so I wrap, as a right-hander, I wrap from left to right. People who are left-handed do it backwards. Nothing wrong with that. I just want everybody to be conscious of that. If you're a lefty, you're going to put your pliers over here and work your way that way. And I may need to, there we go. All right, so I'm going to start at the left. I'm going to wrap from here all the way over to here. And about every 4 or 5, I'm going to kind of push them together. And then I'm going to set them with my wire wrap pliers. There. And then I can continue wrapping from the left side all the way over to the right, setting this wrap as I go. Okay, so now I'm on the last section. I'm just kind of setting this in place, and I'm going to trim off the ends. Now notice I began and I end my wraps here on the side that I put all my marks. We're going to also cut these to trim the excess wire off at that same spot on that same side. And I'm cutting these, I always cut my wire wrap ends about half the width of the bundle of wires that I'm wrapping. I always do that. It hides the ends well, and it keeps everything clear and safe so that people aren't scratching. If you cut it even with the sides, it does have a tendency to scratch people, and you don't want that. So I just always cut them so they're about half the width of this wire bundle. Now let's go ahead and we'll wrap this top section. So we're going to start here on this left wrap. So I've already done the center. We're going to move over here to this left side, and I'm going to do this side slightly different. What I'm going to do here is I am going to not set this side like we did the center every 4. We kind of used the pliers and set them in place, squished them. We're not going to do that here. We want these to move slightly because we're going to use these a little bit looser so that they can center the whole piece, and that'll make more sense when we get to the top and start doing that. So just know that I'm going to be doing loose wraps on here, not so loose that it's not going to hold, but I'm not going to set them in place. The other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to count how many wraps I put here, because I want to do the same amount of wraps here on this other side. So we'll begin by setting up our wire wrap pliers. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Let's see, 6. I'm going to do 7, and we'll do one more, 8. So I did 8 wraps here. See, now I didn't set them. What I am going to do though is I'm going to trim off the excess wire. I'll trim off this excess over on this side. And then we're going to count and do the same thing on the other side. 6, 7, 8. Then we'll just trim off this excess on this side. Now, one thing I do on here is I do push down the cut ends so that they're even with the rest of the wrap. But let me show you, these wraps should move. I'm not going to move very easily, but they will move, and this will give us the opportunity to adjust things. So now that we've got all of that wrapped, we can take all of this tape off of here. We don't need these any longer. We do have more tape, then we're going to be using more tape as well, but for now we just can take these off. And the next thing we want to do is we're going to shape this around our stone. So what I like to do is, since I'm going to be putting a gap between everything in this bottom and the top of this, I usually kind of go to the center of this with my wire wrap pliers, and I just make a bend because I want it to mimic the bend or the tip of this stone. So we're going to do it here, and I'm going to bring the sides around like that, and then I'm going to move these tops. See, I want this, I'm going to now kind of simulate this gap that I want to put in here, just so that I can do a few things here. So I'm going to make the gap a little wide, and so we need to move these up here, these wraps up higher. You want to make sure you got them kind of even. To give us a gap here at the bottom. See, so let me, hopefully you can see the gap that I'm trying to put in here. That's about, I want about this much of a gap. So I'm going to kind of conform the rest of this wrap a little tighter around the stone in order to add that gap in there. So I want to elongate that curve on the side. So that ought to be about right. And then let's take a look at the top. So these are kind of close to where we're going to want them. We're going to move them up just a little bit more. And kind of cross them over so that they reach the top of the stone. This one's too high. Move him down. Just, whoops, he moved a little too much. Okay. So if we bring everything together. Okay, so that's about what I want. So we can now shape the back of the stone, or the area where the stone is going to sit. Now I always take this bottom wire, and I start here in the center, and I grab one wire here at the bottom where it comes out of that bottom wrap, and I twist the pliers to the middle I want this little section there to go to the middle. Let me do that again here at the bottom. Same exact thing. I'm going to move them, and we can adjust this a little bit later. And we're going to do the same thing here at the top. We're just under that wrap. We're going to grab one wire, the wire that we twisted, into the middle, and we're going to bend it. Now, notice I bent mine a little bit lower than where the wrap is. This is where the bend is. I'd say it's 1/4 of an inch, maybe 10 millimeters-ish below. I'm doing that because I want to hide some of these bends behind the stone. I'll do the same thing here, so I get them kind of even. So now I should be able to put the stone in the setting. And I should be able to bring things around the stone. And if I have to make adjustments, which it looks like I'm going to have to make some adjustments, because you can see all the wires, so I'm going to probably adjust that after I get everything set in place, when I get the prongs on and I get those set up. I'll do that last, but this is not where I want the top. I'm just now noticing that's too much, or that's too high. So I'm going to have to adjust that. And you might run into this problem yourself. What you have to do is you have to undo the wrap, and you need to push the wrap down the wires. And sometimes that doesn't work as easily as you'd like. But this, since we're using dead soft wire, it does work really well. And it is rather easy to do that because dead soft wire is rather forgiving. So let's see if this is where I want everything, because I might also have to adjust those wraps at the bottom. But like I said, okay, so maybe 1/4 of an inch at the bottom, and 1/4 of an inch gap here at the top. There, look at that. Okay, so that's about what we want right there. So I'm going to make these bends just a little bit lower than the wrap on both sides. This is just a basic border wrap, is all this is. So now we can put our stone here. And we can make some adjustments as we go. But there we go. So now that we got the back done, we can kind of work on the rest of this. Now, I want to keep the stone in the piece where it belongs. So you remember this piece of tape that we cut that sliver off of? I want you to cut another, not a sliver, but just a length of this tape. It can be as wide or as narrow as you'd like it. But what we're going to do is we're going to use this tape to hold this where we want the stone to stay. So I want the stone to stay right about there as I work on the top of this. So I'm going to put it in here. I may have to move it down just a little bit. There we go. And I'm going to just tape the stone in the setting right there, because I'm going to work on this top. This is going to help me get everything lined up where I want it. And you want it lined up right at the top of the stone. So if I take and cross them over and I bring those two tips of that top wrap together, it should be pretty close to centered, and it should put that gap in there. And if you need to make any more adjustments, yeah, that's right where it's at. So I'm now, when I get it where I want it, I can squeeze these wraps and set them in place where I want them so that they do not move. So that's where they're going to be. And you can move these wraps a little bit more. If you make a mistake and you have one higher or shorter than the other one, or lower than the other one rather, they will move, but it takes a whole lot of pressure and work. So now that I got them crossed over one another, I want to uncross them. So right here, just above the wrap, I'm going to take this bundle, this section here, I'm going to bend it outwards. And I'm going to do the same thing over here. I'm going to take it just above there, I'm going to bend it outwards. I'm making bunny ears. I always say that in class and people laugh, so hopefully you laugh too. And now I'm going to bring the bunny ears together. And I'm going to line them up. I want them to be parallel with one another, right across from one another, because this is going to make the bail. So I want them to come together. I want them to be kind of even with, not even, but parallel with one another. Once I get them all parallel, I'm going to take another piece of this painter's tape, and about an inch or so above where they come together, I'm going to put a flag, and that flag is going to hold the top section together. So now we see the pieces starting to come together. And I'm going to I like to also kind of wiggle this back and forth. I hold it right there to wiggle it back and forth to get this to stay together much better, because we're going to wrap that top section. So we're going to pull off another piece of wrap wire, and I make my bales a little bit different than a lot of other people. Actually, I make my bales different than most people because I make a very strong bale. So I'm going to use about a 10-inch piece of this wrap wire. I make a double wrap on this. I'm going to wrap from the top of these two wraps where they come together. I'm going to do 7 wraps up. I'm going to then make the bale, and then I'm going to go 7 wraps down so that the wires meet, and then I'm going to twist them together. I do that because this makes an extremely strong bale. I don't like people to leave my booth when I'm doing art shows with a piece that could unravel on them or not be safe. So using my wire wrap pliers again, I've got them lined up right at the top where everything comes together here on the bale, and I'm going to put my wrap wire in. And actually, since this is a double, I'm going to choke up a little bit on my pliers here so that the gap in between is a little narrower. Put it in, and we're just going to start wrapping. Okay, so that's 7. And so notice where I've got them. And I'm going to now push this wrap down until it meets the two halves. So I've got, this is my starting wire, and this is the ending. This is the extra ending wire. I got them both pointing out the back. And that's important because we're going to then join those two together. So I can take this tape off. Before moving on, I want to, now that I moved that, I want to set this. So I'm going to squeeze this wrap there. Now I want to separate these two sides so that I have my 4 wires for this side or out there and the 4 wires that go this way, and I'm going to separate them, and I'm going to bring them down to this point here. I'm going to take a wire from each side, the front wire from each side. This is going to become the bail. So I'm going to grab one wire. I'm going to try to grab one wire from the front. Yeah, it's not cooperating. There we go. So I got one wire from one side, and I'm going to take another wire, the front wire from the other side. And what I'm going to do, let me get this extra tape off of me. What I'm going to do is I'm going to bend these 2 wires that I brought back out that are going to make up the bail. I'm going to curve them with my fingertip. Now you can use something. You can put a Sharpie at this one of these fine tip permanent markers. You can put that and make your bail. If you've got bail making pliers, you can use those. I have always just used my fingers, and I just bend them over my fingers. And I want the wire ends to go down the back of the piece, down the center, in between the long wire and this short wire. what we're going to do is we're going to take this long wire and we're going to wrap it over our first wrap, but incorporating these bail wires. So I've pushed this bottom half down, so I've got a curve and then it meets up here. And then I can take my wrap wire and I can now wrap 7 or 8 times towards the end. So I just wrap until I get evened up with that little stubby end. I'm going to do one more. There we go. See, you see what we did? Now they're right next to each other, parallel from one another. The short one and the long one are parallel with one another. Now I'm going to set this wrap in place over the other wrap. So it's a double wrap. And then I'm going to take these 2 wires and I'm going to twist tie them together. So I'm going to take them and I'm just going to twist them, making a nice pigtail twist tie here. And I just kind of whip it a little bit just to get it up close. You don't want to do it too much up against this because you will break this. This is very fine wire. So now take that pigtail and I want you to push it up towards the top of the piece so that it's up against the wrap. And then I want you to cut it so that it's about 3 or 4 twists. So it's a tiny little stubby end right there. Just a tiny stubby end. Now make sure that these 2 here, these 2 are level, that they're even with one another. And one side might be just a hair shorter than the other side. Now is the time that you want to make any adjustments to this, because what we're going to do is we're going to take the 2 long wires that we have coming out the back, and I want you to grab them at the bottom and I want you to bend them up. So notice I bent them upward. I've covered that little pigtail that I've used, and that's why we bent them up. We bent them upward so that that little pigtail is there. So it covers that little pigtail rather. Now just above the wrap, I want you to put your pliers and you're going to bend from the pliers to the end of the wire. You're going to bend that area down and make a hook. And this hook is just going to clean up that end. You don't need to make this hook. You can just put this whole thing upward and then trim it off and push it up against. I like to make this fancy little hook on mine. So let me finish doing that. I'm just going to trim the ends short. And I'm going to continue that bend until it is bent into itself, making a nice hook here. There. So I just made this little hook and I just push everything up against it and I check to see if it's scratchy, and it's not. Everything should be right where it belongs. And that is what we do there. That's what we do with that's a bail. So look, notice our piece is starting to come together. Got everything where we want it. We're going to need to make some adjustments at the bottom of this, but then we can do all that as we go as well. But I think I want to bring this together just a little bit more there now that I'm thinking about it. There we go. So what to do with these? Now there's several things you can do with these wires we've got hanging out. I normally like to use them to put a decoration at the top. You can opt to take them off if you'd like. But I'm going to show you both, kind of both ways. I'm going to show you how to take them off. Separate the wire you want to take off. Now, if I'm going to use these as decorative pieces, I usually just keep 2 wires here and get rid of the third one because I found that personally, I found that 2 wires do much better with making little curves and everything than more than 2. So I'm going to take this 1 wire off, and this is the back wire that's left of these 3 arm wires, and I'm just going to hold it at about a 45-degree angle, and I'm going to bend it back and forth so that it's going to pop off there. Popped off, and it just leaves a tiny, tiny, tiny little piece holding on to the inside of this wrap. So I'm going to get rid of that one. I'm going to do the same thing over here. I'm going to take this as the back wire because I'm at the back of the piece. I'm going to wiggle it back and forth until it comes off. That's a good thing about dead soft. It's also the good thing about using small gauge wire. Now this does work on larger gauge wire as well. Now my personal style is to make some interesting curves and curls and do stuff like that. So I'm just going to make something simple for this one for time's sake. So I've just made just that one little curl there, and I'm going to trim it and push it on the inside of the curve so that it does not hurt anyone. Probably need to use, there we go, I got it. There, so I closed that curve. I'm going to take this one and I'm going to bend it back over, and I'm going to do kind of an opposite curl on this. So I'll show you what I got here in just a second. And I'm going to trim it off here. Tuck it in. So that's what I came up with here. Just something simple, quick and simple. So this is what our piece looks like. The thing we need to do now is we need to make the prong setting that's going to go into this piece. Let's do that right now. We'll start on that prong setting. So to start the prongs, we need the stone back. So we need to pull this tape off of here. We don't really need it any longer. We've pretty much have everything done where we want it. So find the end, there it is, and just peel this tape off and pull the stone out. It should pop right out the front, so shouldn't be a problem getting it out if I can get the tape off. There we go. There we are. So should just be able to pop it right out. So you've made just basically a bezel setting to a degree. Okay, so we're going to set this aside. And the reason why we need the stone is because we want to measure the stone. We want the length of the stone. I've measured my stone. It's about 1.5 inches. It's about 1.5 inches long, 35 millimeters. It's just under 1.5 inches. So we're going to round it up to 1.5 inches. And what I'm going to do is, what I've done is I've cut two 18 gauge square wires at 3 inches. That's about twice the length of the stone. If you kind of use that as kind of a rule of thumb, it should give you plenty of wire to work with to make these prongs. I always kind of double the length of the stone for my prong wires just so I have the reach. So once you straighten them out, let's kind of move things out of the way here a bit for just a second. So I've straightened my wires out, and I'm going to set them next to one another, square them up so that they're even. I'm just going to take and make a flag just like we did with the other bundle of wires. I'm going to put a flag on each end to hold these two together. There we go. So now they're right next to each other and nice and centered. We're going to use this, and we're going to find the center of our bundle, which should be at 1.5 inches. This will help us center this on the stone. It will also help us with making the cut and wrap area. So I want to make a mark at the center of this. So at 1.5 inches, I'm going to take a fine tip permanent marker, and I'm just going to make a mark across both of them. Now, that's the other reason why we wanted to know how long this is, because we're going to make a wrap in the center of this. And I think I'm going to want to make it about approximately 1/2 inch. So if I kind of line this up in the middle, 1/2 inch would probably be pretty good for this one. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a mark here. I'm going to center this at 1/4 inch, and then I'm going to make a mark here on the left at 0, and then to the right at 1/2 inch. This will be the area that we're going to wrap. Now, In wire smithing, we do a technique called a cut and wrap technique. And what we're going to do is we're going to cut using this hand file. I've got a hand file that's got a filing surface on the sides of it as well as the front and the back of it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to, first of all, I want to make this job easier. I'm going to take and put a piece of tape on the outside of this wrap. That's going to hold these wires firmly together. So I'll put a piece of tape there, and I got another small one here. And that's just going to hold these two wires next to each other better as we cut them. So I'm just going to use the side of the file, and I'm going to just file, I'd say, about 1/2 millimeter of this wire off in between those two outside marks. Now this is kind of boring to watch, so I'm going to speed this up a little bit and come back when I'm almost done. Okay, so I always like to kind of turn it around, just make sure I got it even, but I always like to go back over the opposite side just a little bit, just to make sure I got it even and level. This is going to make a nice shoulder for the wrap wire to sit in, and so that it won't loosen the wrap. This is going to make a good tight wrap. So it's hard to tell what I've done. You can kind of see maybe a little bit brighter area where I've cut, but that area is the area we're going to wrap, what we just cut. So I'm going to use 18 gauge half round wire to wrap this with. We don't need a whole lot of this wrap wire. We probably only need about, I'd say about less than 6 inches. I'm going to chop off a piece about 6 inches long though. And I'm going to use that as the wrap for this. So we've got our wire wrap pliers. I'm going to start here at one end of that cut and wrap area. So I'm just going to line my pliers up. I'm going to take this. Now, I want you to go just outside of that wrap area. We're going to want this tail to be a little longer, and I'll explain that in a minute. So let's put this in to our wire wrap pliers, and we're going to wrap this together. I'm going to make a nice tight wrap here. About every 3 or 4 or 5, I'm going to stop and I'm going to set this in place and continue on until I get to the other end of this. And I'm not going to cut any of the excess off. We're going to use this excess wire to adhere this setting to the wire, the frame that we just made for the stone. So we're going to kind of put these two together to make one complete piece. So just about here at the end there. Notice I've got some excess wire here. We're going to use that. But now I also want to do one thing. This is too short to use. I want to give me just a little bit more of this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to unwrap it one complete wrap. See how that looks. Yeah, that should give us, maybe we'll do 2. There, that's 2. That should be fine. 2 complete wraps. That should be plenty of wire to do what we're going to do with it. So I leave those on. We can take this tape off. We can now use this. We don't need this tape, so we'll throw that away. Now that we have the tape off, straighten everything out a little bit, I want you to separate those wires just a little bit. You don't need to do it a lot, because what we're going to do is we want to do it about, we want to be able to get these in here. So I've got the where I stopped the wraps here facing me. I have those up, so I'm going to separate those. Those are going to actually stay against the stone. So And all I'm going to do is I'm going to take these prong wires and I'm just going to bend them like this away from me. So I've got the area that has the ends facing me, and I'm just bending these downward, and that's going to all make sense in just a second. So we want to determine which is the top. I'm going to use this as the top. Now what I'm going to do is I've got my frame, I've got the back of it facing my work surface, and I'm going to take the top two prongs and I'm going to put them in here and then put the bottom two prongs. So you just kind of work these guys on the outside of that back support area. There we go. So I'm just sliding that through onto the piece, and I want to bring it about to the center of there. And you can straighten these out and bring them forward towards you to kind of lock them in place just a little bit. Because what we're going to do, sorry I went off camera there, but what we're going to do now is, now that we've got this centered, we can take these wrap ends and we can wrap these to the supports here in the frame. Okay, so I know it may not make a whole lot of sense, but you have to kind of work these guys in there till they get in, and grab it and pull. So pulling, and I'm just going to add about 2 or 3 wraps to this, and that's just going to adhere the setting to the wire wrap frame that we made to hold the stone. And the good thing is this is all wire, this is all dead soft wire, so it's pretty forgiving. So that's what, 1 wrap. Here's number 2. I'm going to push it up into the center here and grab it, pull. Okay, so that's got these two together. Okay, and I think 2 should do it, so let's go ahead and we'll trim off this, and I'm trimming it on the inside, or the up against, it'll be up against the stone. Okay, and then do the same thing here with this bottom end. I'm going to put it into the center, and we're going to grab it and pull and make a wrap. And you notice I'm kind of pulling everything together. So I'm pulling those frame wires in against the wrap that I'm making. So here's number 2. And then I should have just enough to bring this back around. There we go. I'm just going to, that's number 2. So I'm just going to trim that off. You want at least, I'd say 2. And then we'll push it up against everything. Okay, so that should have everything firmly in place. And now we can kind of figure out where these prongs are going to go. And that's going to require us putting the stone back in. But first thing we want to do is we want to kind of get these set to a degree where they're going to go. So these ones I didn't move towards the front of the piece, I'm going to do that now. So they're all, notice, I'm going to show you, just let me get this finished right there. Very goodly. Okay, so this is what we have. Okay, we've wire wrapped this centerpiece here, the prong setting. We've wrapped that excess 18 gauge wire to the bundle here. And now we can just take our stone and we can set our stone here into our setting. It's going to take some work because sometimes this setting will move, but everything will be fine. There we go. Okay, so you want to make sure you got it right where you want it. Okay. And now move your prongs to where you want them. The prongs are going to hold everything in place. And then once you do, just take them and push them over the piece one by one. This one kind of moved on me. There we go. And then this one over. And then this one over. And then I can just trim them now. So I should be able to just trim them short over the piece, kind of where I want them. I'm going to trim this guy just a touch shorter here. And we'll do the same thing with this one here. Well, it's better to trim too long than too short because you can always trim a little bit more. Okay. And the same thing with these top two. We're going to trim these off about where we want them. Again, too long is better than too short. Okay. There we go. So let's kind of clear off some of this and let me show you what we're working with here. So let's just take a look at what we've got here. Just make a little minor adjustments with these prongs because we're going to actually take the stone back out because we want to trim the, not trim, but we want to shape these prongs. But right now is where you want to make sure you've got things placed where you want them. Now you notice that you can see some of those wires from the front. So what I want to do is I want to make just some slight adjustments here to kind of hide those a little better. So I'm just manipulating these so I can now go to the front. Don't really see them as bad as we were. This one can be used to, I can just kind of adjust this guy just a little bit more. That's good. And the top ones really can't see because I've got things in the way of them, but we can make some adjustments here to kind of hide them a little better. And once you're happy with what you've got, we can now open these prongs. So I'm going to open these prongs up slightly, not all the way, but just enough to be able to get the stone out. So I'm just pulling the prong loose, and I'm going to pop the stone out. Let me loosen up these bottom ones as well. They're not going to go anywhere because you've got them firmly affixed to the back of the frame. So the frames are all one piece now. So things aren't going to shift on you. And what I'm going to use now is I'm going to take my Dremel tool with my silicone rubber polishing wheel. You can find those, I've got a link in the description below where you can find these. These are great for polishing these. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a curve on the prongs so that they just look better. Now you can use just a regular old flat needle file like this, and you can take and just shape these by just putting the roundness in there. Very simple. Eventually those will go round. I prefer to use the Dremel with one of these silicone polishing wheels, these rubber silicone polishing wheels. So let me do that right now, and I'll show you what it looks like when we're done. Okay, so this is what we've got. Is we've just taken and just added just a nice curve. It's hard to see, but we've curved these and took some of the bulk out of them. Now we can final set the stone. So just replace the stone where you had it. Make sure you've got the sides of this flat and against everything, and then you can just take, and I always put the one jaw, this one, at the bottom of the prong, and then the other one I put at the tip of the prong and I gently, ever so gently, push it up and over the stone. And I work in opposites. So I started here, so I'm going to go up here to this top one. And I'm just going to ever so gently push this onto the stone. You want a nice tight prong setting, but you also don't want the pliers to slip and hit the stone. Be very careful as you're doing this so that you do not mess up your stone. Scratch it or chip it. Some stones have fractures in them, and you want to avoid making a weak spot and causing it to fracture. See that one almost had that set in the wrong place. But now this final, very final one here, we're going to push that down against the stone. And there you have it. Very simply done. Make sure your prongs are all pointing in the right direction, that they're even. You want them all to point to the middle. Make sure they're firmly against the stone. And there you have it. All we did was we just took two different techniques and wrapped them into one. This is great for a lot of different things. Let me go and explain that to you right now. Now, wasn't that interesting? Interesting project, taking those two and putting them together like that. Let me share with you a few ways you can use this. Let's say that you have a beautiful stone and you don't want to put anything over the front of it because it's just too interesting and unique. Using this type of prong setting inside of a traditional wire wrapped piece is a way to use this combination. That will help so that you've got very, very, very little covering the stone, but you have a nice setting that it's in. Okay, so that's one. I also want you to think about this. We come across a lot of very high domed stones. High domed stones take a little bit more wire around them to really make them stand out or give them the support that they need. Using a prong setting like this inside of a border wrapped bezel will help you to use that stone, give it the support it needs, and make a nice, elegant piece out of a stone that's got a rather high dome. I want you to keep in mind that any place that you can use a border wrap where it's got very similar aspects that we did here, you can add that wire-smithed prong setting to it. So think about some of the bracelets that you've made that are traditionally wire wrapped. Some of the rings that you may have made that were traditional wire wrap. See, those are various ways you can incorporate wire smithing into that. So I really hope you enjoyed it. I really enjoyed making this, and please come back and see us again. Again, my name is Jim McIntosh, and there's something I want you to remember, and I say it all the time: practice, practice, practice.